J. Michael Show.
Welcome to another episode. My guest tonight is Gregg Stewart. He's the author of Let It Out, and we're going to be talking to him about his book, his career. He's also a film producer, director, and we got a lot of things to go into, so let's meet Gregg. Gregg, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So tell me about this. You're also an award-winning songwriter, a recording artist, touring musician. What kind of instrument do you play?
I play guitar, but I can kind of fumble my way around anything with strings, but mainly guitar, just starting out as a songwriter, guitarist, and then going on the road. I've had a lot of incarnations endeavoring to live a creative life for the past 3 decades. So there's lots of things I've done with my creativity, and I'm grateful for it always. Yeah.
So what inspired you to write the book, Let It Out?
Well, Let It Out really came from, there's a couple workshops my wife and I do in town, and it just became a kind of theme of just inviting people to really embrace their creativity. I would tell people often, like, we understand fundamentally that you can get value from going to the gym, even if you're not a professional bodybuilder or an athlete. And in that same way, I believe you can really get value from connecting with your creativity, even if you don't consider yourself, an A-list actor, filmmaker, songwriter, or whatever. There's still immense value from engaging with your creativity just by what you can learn about what's going on inside of you. That's the really important thing. Mm-hmm. This is what our creativity can teach us. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many times I've worked on a short story or written a song and then read it back and thought, oh, that's what's going on with me. And it was like a message from my subconscious. And really there was a real lesson there and some real value there. And again, in the same way I talk about the value of just going to the gym, even if you have no intention of being a professional athlete, we understand it's just good for your health. Engaging with your creativity is good for your soul's health. It's soul medicine, we like to say.
Yeah. How is creativity good for your health?
There's a lot of things that are actually, really great for your creativity. The one thing is I think it's a more Eastern philosophy around health, but I like to believe, and I've learned from a lot of my great mentors, that your health is really the summation of everything you're doing physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. All of that has influenced your current level of physical health. And in the same way, someone can smoke and drink and eat a steak every night and somehow live to 100, really kind of technically abuse their body physically, we can say. And you can still live to 100 with good genetics. But I've never seen anybody stress themselves out to 100. The emotional and mental impact of what's going on inside of us, if we don't deal with it, if we don't process it, these traumas, if we don't look at it, it can really affect our physical health over time, causing things like anxiety, depression, all kinds of things. And so the opportunity to engage with your creativity and really having the courage and the vulnerability, those are the two fundamental things that are important. It's not about talent to me. I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of really creative people, and the people that move the room every time aren't the most talented people in the room. It's the ones with the most vulnerability and the most courage to share vulnerably.
How does your creativity affect your confidence?
So, that's a really great question. So I think the willingness to engage with your creativity and make a habit out of it, like just to visit with your creativity, you begin to learn more about yourself. You begin to process those things and really take a good look at what's causing you to feel less than or anxious or sad or depressed. You journal it and it loses a lot of its charge, a lot of its weight. I often say sometimes there's things going on inside of me that feel like the weight of the world. And then once I let them out, turns out they're only about as heavy as a book, or as light as a song,
Right.
And that's really what's powerful about letting it out. It doesn't have such a hold on you.
Right.
Yeah. And once it's not holding you down, then you start to feel more at peace with who you are. And when you're more at peace with who you are, you feel naturally a little more confident about who you are. You understand yourself a little bit better. You feel a little more comfortable in your own skin. And I think that's the journey everyone's on, is just we're all on a journey of really becoming comfortable in our own skin, comfortable with who we are and what we're about. And your creativity is one of the great guiding tools that you can use to connect in that way.
What is, in your book you mentioned it, what is your definition of soul medicine?
Yeah. So I think anytime it's one thing to let's say dream analysis, right? It's one thing to wake up and say, well, I had this crazy dream where I was a hot dog running down the street, you know. But it's another thing to actually delve into the analysis of what does it mean to dream about being a hot dog? What does it mean to be running down the street? And you can get all kinds of insights about your current level of confidence or what maybe you might be struggling with or grappling with. That debriefing with yourself around that dream analysis is where you really can learn what your subconscious and that sleeping mind is trying to tell you about what's going on inside of you. And we can utilize creativity in the same way. When we engage with our creativity, the real game is to debrief with yourself. Actually take a look at what you created, what you wrote down, and ask yourself, of all the things I could have written, of all the songs I could have written, of all the journal entries or poems I could have written, why this? Why am I talking about this right now? And I think it's really crucial that we do that debrief with ourselves. This is where the real gift of our creativity comes in. We often, in our culture, and we live in a very results-oriented culture, capitalist culture, that tells us your creativity is just there for, it's just content. We call it content. We call it, it's there for others to consume. But really, the true gift of your creativity, what makes it your soul's medicine, is that the biggest gift you're ever going to get from your creativity is what you learned about yourself by being creative. That's where it's at.
That is a good point, an excellent
Yeah.
point. Well, how does your creativity tie in with your self-worthiness and your worthiness?
This is great. Well, there's a few ways you can come at it with your creativity. And again, being creative is an amazing opportunity to show some vulnerability and to be courageous. And every time you do it, there's a kind of endorphin rush with it a bit, you know. And again, to that same analogy about going to the gym, you know, sometimes if you're going to the gym and just looking at yourself in the mirror and ridiculing yourself, you're kind of missing the point. The real gift of going to the gym is just that you made it through the door and you get to celebrate that you have a body that can move and pick up a weight and put it down or get on a treadmill, whatever it looks like. Some people wished they could get to the gym, but didn't have the time or the energy or the health to do it. So whenever you engage with your creativity in the same way, realize and celebrate that you made time for yourself to honor what's going on inside of you. You put energy into it, and it is in some ways a mental health act to really connect with your creativity. And in that way, by honoring it over time, building that habit, daily practice, even just 10 minutes a day of journaling, or even a weekly practice when you can get to it. The point is to build a habit around it, and your self-worth, you will naturally feel more, as I said, more comfortable in your own skin. You'll begin to understand yourself a little better. And when you understand yourself a little better, you have more acceptance around who you are. And when you have self-acceptance, this naturally leads to a sense of self-worth. You have a little bit of pride in what you've been able to accomplish, what you've created, what you learned about yourself. And again, that courage and vulnerability is at the very heart of it.
Can a person that's not creative or not allowed or in some position where they can't be creative, can that affect whether you get sick or your health?
I do believe there's a correlation with people who are honoring what's inside their soul through whatever that looks like. Whether it's just doing interpretive dance and every night before or after dinner, I don't know. It's or even just, I tend to talk about creativity in terms of, poetry and songs and, novels and short stories and all of that. But you can absolutely be creative in your garden, wherever the place is that you find where you truly lose track of time. That's how you know you're in what we call the creative slipstream. When you don't realize 3 hours have gone by and you're like, I could have done this for 10 hours and not realized it. I forgot to eat lunch. I was so caught up in it. That's when you're definitely have what we call finding your jam. You found that thing that lights you up. And I think everybody has that thing that lights them up. It can be different for everyone, but if you're not sure you have a thing that lights you up, I would invite you to look at the thing you loved doing most when you were 7. Everyone I know who's living a creative life and truly loves what they do discovered it somewhere around 7, 8 years old, a version of what they're doing now that they were just enamored by and in love with. So many
Wow.
great musicians discovered the guitar or the drums at around 7 or 8, or saw it on TV and said, I want to do that. So look in your own life, do that little debriefing with yourself. What did I love doing most when I was 7, 8, 9 years old? Find a version of that to do. And not necessarily from a place of content and commerce. Like I said, it's not about making a living at it. It's just about honoring what's in your soul and what lights you up, honoring what's inside of you.
So someone comes to you and they say, Greg, I would love to do this. I would love to be creative, but I
Yep.
have no talent. I'm like
Right.
zero talent. What
Right.
do you say to them?
Well, the thing is, and I'll can quote kind of loosely quote Kurt Vonnegut, who I mentioned in the book. He kind of says, just do artful things in your life. Do it badly. Write a bad poem. It really doesn't matter. It is the soul's medicine.
Hmm.
It's has nothing to do with talent. And like I said earlier, it's kind of the most talented people in the room, or not the most talented, the people in the room who move the room, who truly leave people with deep belly laughs or tears in their eyes, just really cause a visceral reaction of emotion. These are not the most talented people in the room. These are the people with the most vulnerability and the most courage to show up and share their talents with vulnerability. That's where the magic happens. And so I think we give way too much stock to talent. I think there's a place for really learning your craft, and it takes time to learn your craft. And the
Hmm.
only way you're going to learn your craft is by engaging with your creativity, whether it's any good or not.
Hmm.
And noticing that it's kind of lousy when you start out and endeavoring to do it anyway because it feels good to you.
Right.
You answer to no one but you. And
Hmm.
that's where I would tell someone who doesn't think they have any talent. If you find joy doing this, the talent doesn't matter. You will learn craft over time. And the real game here is to engage with it from a place of vulnerability.
Hmm.
That's what's going to move the room every time.
Wow.
And anyway, so
Wow.
just I would encourage people just to just set a time, pull out your calendar, book it, from 7:30 to 7:45, just 15 minutes. I'm going to just sit down and journal, and I'm going to do that every morning this week and see what I might discover about myself. And I think you'll be shocked at what you might learn.
So, how would you define talent? What is a talent someone has?
I think there's a lot of people who have an innate gift towards something, a capacity around. Maybe there's a virtuoso guitarist, but here's the trap of talent, though. When you're really talented, you don't necessarily work as hard as the guy who's no good at it and keeps going anyway. And
Hmm.
so it's harder to learn how to be vulnerable when you're really talented.
Hmm.
You rely on being, having a knack for something.
Right.
But really, where the vulnerability comes on, where the magic comes in, is when you're not that great at it and you just decide you're just going to do it anyway. And you
Yeah.
don't care who says you don't have what it takes, kid, or don't quit your day job. And you just do it anyway because you know it feeds your soul. Those are where the truly talented end up because they just had the capacity, the willingness, and the drive, and the self-discipline and the perseverance. There's a lot of words for it, but just power through even when the talent wasn't necessarily there. And honestly, there's some people who you just have a knack for something, and that's great. But unless you're willing to really make it your jam, make it a passionate thing that you're going to go to, the talent is not going to take you as far as you think it might.
Huh. Okay. Okay. A moment ago, you mentioned something called the creative slipstream. I want you to define that for me.
Yeah, so it's really just anytime you can, you're doing something you love,
Hmm.
something that just feels good to you. I'm exploring this poem right now, or I'm working on this piece of art, or taking this photograph of just this tree from 100 different angles. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything like that. But when you, when the critic, there's because so many of us have just an inner critic running in our head, this
Hmm.
idea of like when you're writing a song, you're like, well, you can write that line down, but you're going to change it later. That's cheesy. It's stupid. Or why are you taking these photos right now? You should be, I don't know, making money somewhere. Like all that inner critic, whatever that dialogue is.
Right.
This isn't as good as this other person I admire, or whatever. The comparison is also a trap. So if you get into your creative flow in such a way that that inner critic kind of disappears. It just kind of sends them out of the room,
Yeah.
and you just find yourself creating for the joy and the love of creating, and time seems to disappear for you. That's the real slipstream, and that's where the magic happens. But it takes a concerted effort to fire the critic, send that critic out the door, and decide to truly just honor your spirit and love what you're doing in that moment.
Something that you just said that reminded me of my father. His
Really?
attitude was, if it's not making money or putting food on the table, it was useless. Don't do it.
Yeah.
And so his recreation became fishing and hunting because he justified it by, I'm putting food on the table,
On the
I'm
table.
putting fish or whatever. And so it just resonated with me when you said that sometimes you got to take that critic and kick his butt out the door, right?
Yeah, and so many creative people actually come from families where they really believe that
Yeah.
creativity was an absolute waste of time, and
Yeah.
somehow it just didn't resonate with us. It didn't really land with us, and so yeah, it's amazing if you can live a creative life, even having kind of parental reinforcement that you're wasting your time by being creative. But I would definitely beg to differ. My experience in endeavoring to live a creative life is that there is so much available, and life isn't always about the money you're making.
Yeah.
A deep sense of satisfaction, feeling okay with who you are. This is something that I don't know if money can give that,
Right.
but your
Right.
creativity can. Your creativity can.
Yeah. So if someone came to you and they said, well, how do I get started doing this? What would you tell them?
Well, the first step, the first fundamental step, I believe, is you must claim your worthiness.
Mm-hmm.
Understand that you are one of now 8 billion people on this planet. And not one of those 8 billion people has ever had your exact same experiences of life. They have not walked in your particular shoes. So you have a vantage point that is truly unique.
Mm-hmm.
And not just unique amongst the 8 billion that are currently on this planet, but every single person who ever came before. Your particular set of circumstances, your life experiences, where you grew up, who you've met, the songs you've sang along to, and the movies you've watched, and the friends you've made, situations you found yourself in. Nobody has had that exact same set of circumstances and experiences. And so you have this, if you've survived your childhood, you have a lifetime's worth of kind of experiences to pull from, to be creative, and to write about and process and think about little snapshots of your life that have been significant, and look at what they meant to you. What did you learn about yourself through those experiences? And then what did you learn about yourself by taking the time to actually write down that experience? And so claiming your worthiness, I think, is the first step.
Yeah.
No one has lived your specific life. And if you don't share your story with authenticity and vulnerability, it dies with you.
Mm-hmm.
So all the more reason to just light a fire under you to get it out. Like, I want you to live a more creative life. I want more people to live more creative lives, because I think we are in many ways turning over creativity to things like AI and our to-do lists. And we'd rather work on our responsibilities and obligations and never get to the thing that feeds our soul.
Right.
And I'd like to flip that whole thing. I'd like to invite people to flip that whole look, that whole vantage point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, people will say, well, I want to write a song, but I don't know how to write a song, and it's probably not going to be worth anything. And so people feel like if they don't become an awesome poet or a great songwriter that sells millions of hits, it's not worth doing it. But you're saying that it definitely is, even if you write a bad song, right? You keep at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, a couple things I could say about that I think are important to note then. So first is what I've learned is that my bravery in my willingness to write a real dog turd of a song is in direct proportion to my ability to write a great song. The pendulum will only swing far enough one way as I'm willing to risk it going the other way.
Right.
If I just want to write a safe song that's okay and pleasant to the ears, it's not really going to move anybody. I have to be willing to risk writing a really bad song for the capacity and the possibility of writing a great one. And I think it's important to remember that in our work, that if you write a bad song and you know it's bad, You have so much more capacity to write a great song than you realize. Because if you write a bad song and you think it's great, you might be in trouble. But if you write a bad song and you know it's bad, you see the gap. You
Yeah.
see where you're at and you know what great sounds like. And if you know what great sounds like and you see this rift,
Yeah.
you actually have the ability to slowly, over time, stick with it and shore up that rift, shore
Right.
up that gap. But if you think they write a bad song, I'm like, well, this is amazing. I'm just going to keep going. I have more concerns over those people. No, actually, if you wrote something you think this isn't good, and I'm scared to share it with anybody. Ooh, that's actually a great sign. You actually know the difference between where you're at and what great looks like. And
Hmm.
every writer who ever got to great was just willing to just keep doing the work, keep doing the work. Nobody started out great.
Right.
Nobody. Nobody. People have a knack and some innate talent, but you don't get to great songs or great novels without a lot of work. There's so many writers out there. You have never seen their first, second, or third novel. Their hit
Right.
novel, the first one that got published, was the fourth one they actually wrote, or the fifth one they wrote. They just stayed with it.
Yeah. They just kept working at it and working at it. Okay,
Yep.
so you start trying and working your way into living a creative life. What changes will happen to a person once they start doing that?
Well, here's what's interesting about it, and there's a few steps to it. First, like I mentioned, you want to claim your worthiness and know that you have something worth saying.
Hmm.
The next piece is to really kind of pull no punches with yourself, I like to say. Approach the page. Stephen King likes to say you should approach the page like a samurai ready to do battle. Hold nothing back. If you approach the page thinking, what will my mother think if she sees this? What will my spouse, partner, or coworkers think if they saw this? You're allowing all these other voices into your time with your creative voice.
Hmm.
So send them all out of the room and just write what you want to write, even if it's so weird or dark or wild that you think it might freak people out.
Hmm.
It's okay. Let it out. Get
Yes.
that out of yourself. And then really work that over time. And what you'll find, though, as I said, more self acceptance, more understanding of yourself. You'll also find yourself with a much higher capacity for other people's creativity.
Mm.
Other people will have creativity. And if you're firing your inner critic, your outward critic starts to get a little bit less loud. And suddenly you realize, you know, whoever you want to badmouth in the pop world right now, or Taylor Swift, or whoever, whatever you want to say about them, you have to realize that you're just probably not her demographic. You're not Taylor Swift's demographic.
Yeah.
She's not writing songs for your approval. Somewhere in Ohio or Nebraska, there's some 14-year-old girl where Taylor Swift's music is getting her through her childhood.
Right.
And when you see that everyone who has something to share, if they somebody somewhere loves it. Somebody somewhere loves it. Japanese noise rock has its audience, right? And it
Yes.
doesn't matter. You got to make the thing that enlivens you. It will find its niche, and it maybe isn't a big, popular, huge niche, but someone's going to connect with it. Someone's going to say, I see what you're doing and I feel seen because you did it.
Uh-huh.
And when that happens, something magical truly occurs around your well-being and how you walk through the world. Because I remember when I released my first album, and I wasn't sure where it was going to end up or who was going to listen to it. And I got an email from a woman in Ireland, mother of 3 kids, who told me about one of the songs on that record and how much it moved her and how she listened to it every single day. I was some 20-year-old kid living in Southern California, no kids, no mom, just living my life and making music. And I had no idea someone halfway around the world with a completely different life from mine would hear those same words that I wrote that were personal to me and say, this is my life. How did you know my life? And the world becomes a lot smaller in those moments when we share our work from an authentic place. And every songwriter I know has a story like that. Somebody unexpected showed up and said, this song really got me.
Wow.
And I think there's something magical and amazing about that. And I do believe, not to sound too lofty, I do believe that it's those kind of acts, sharing our work, having somebody who looks different than us, talks different than us, has a different life than us, connect with it in such a visceral way. This is the beginning of what I believe is how we get to a more peaceful world.
Right.
Because so much of why we don't have peace with one another is because we act like, well, that person's nothing like me. I'm nothing like that person. But the truth is that we're more like when we realize we all struggle with a lot of the same heartaches, some of the same traumas, unfortunately. And when we're courageous enough to share about those things, and someone has the capacity far away to see it and get it and understand it and connect with it, it makes the world a smaller place. It makes us feel not so distant from one another. And I know through the last few years we've had with this pandemic, we're out of it, but still, I think the PTSD is definitely lingering, I find. I think
Yes.
every single person on this planet is dealing with a certain degree of PTSD. And one of the fundamental ways you can work through that is by being less critical of yourself, less critical of others, engaging with your creativity, what you might learn about and discover about yourself, and realizing that there's a lot more connection. We're not so isolated. We have capacity to connect more than ever, really. But
Right.
are we taking advantage of that? That's the question.
Yeah. Yeah. You just
Yeah.
mentioned, you're a filmmaker, you're a musician, and you were talking about your album. Tell me about your album and where it's available.
Yeah, so I have a bunch. I have a bunch of records. So I had in what almost feels like another life now.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I've had many incarnations as a creative soul. So it's in most of the 2000s, I had a band called Stew Boss.
Mm-hmm.
That's Stewboss, sometimes called the Mighty Stew Boss. We were an indie band from California. Every member of that band came from major record labels. We were all signed to big label deals, and
Mm-hmm.
all of us, for one reason or another, got dropped. And when we came together, we decided we were just going to make music for the love of music. And we
Mm-hmm.
were going to be staunchly independent and allow ourselves to crawl before we were asked to walk and walk before we were asked to run
Mm-hmm.
and just build a real grassroots organic following and just make music because we love being together, love making music. And I think it became a very palpable thing. The biggest comment we got from audiences was that you guys look like you're having so much fun up there. And it's infectious for the crowd because you're just having a good time with each other. And that was it. It was always just an invitation to be together in a band. And we played for as long as it felt fun to do it. And then everyone kind of found other things they wanted to do. And it happened rather organically. We kind of drifted apart a bit. But we had some really lovely champions in our corner. And we played locally in Los Angeles on 95.5 KLOS on the Mark and Brian show. And Mark was a real big fan of ours, such a sweetheart. Whispering Bob Harris, veteran DJ for the BBC.
Mm-hmm.
He's the first guy in England to play bands like Little Feat and Bonnie Raitt and Jackson Brown. He took a liking to our first record and just played all of our albums. We have 6 albums altogether, just putting one record out every year, going on tour, being in a band, get in the van kind of thing, and just have a good time. And it was amazing that we were able to bankroll the whole thing ourselves as an indie band and get ourselves to England and go on tour and make money on tour and do all of that. I would feel so blessed for that time with that band. But
Wow.
I've had a couple bands since Stew Boss, since the Mighty Stew Boss. I also have with my wife a band called the Mazarines,
Mm-hmm.
which is just really fun dream pop stuff. We mostly do duets. Um, but we've got a song coming up in a video game. I don't think I'm allowed to announce yet. But yeah, fun things like that. And you just make music because you love making music. Yeah, and so since then, I've worked as a journalist and I've done lots of interviews and worked for my local magazine. And I also have written a bunch of short stories and anthologies and so short films and did film composing for short films, which is
Wow.
always fun to do. And also, my wife and I have a screenplay out right now that we're actually shopping right now. So lots of creative endeavors. Keeping ourselves busy creatively has been, one of the focal points of our lives and what I know makes us feel enlivened and alive. So we're just going to keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. As we say in the South, you have a lot of irons in the fire.
A lot of irons in the fire. It's
Yeah.
true. It's yeah, and being invited into more all the time, but we love it. We love it. It enlivens us.
Well, what films have you worked on?
There's a few indie films out there that I really love. The one that I'm most excited and proud of though is a short film, just a short film called Beautiful Dead Things. It's like a less than 20 minutes. My wife co-wrote it. She wrote it and co-directed it and starred in it. And I did all the music with my good friend Kevin Jarvis, who owns the Sonic Boom Room in Venice, California. Great recording studio. And he's an amazing drummer as well. And so my wife, Renee Fea, she wrote an amazing script. It's really a beautiful story as a short film. I like to say it's a nonlinear script. It moves like memory. And this is how people are able to track it because our memory moves that way. We see one thing and it reminds us of another thing,
Right.
and then that memory reminds us of another thing, and we're kind of down the train of
Domino.
thought, as they say, right?
Yeah.
Down the rabbit hole. And so the film moves like that, but it really has such a beautiful story arc, and it was really fun to do the music for that, and it did great on the festival circuit. She was named, top 10 directors to watch by Diversity in Cannes, at the Cannes Film Festival, and there's also the Female Eye Festival in Toronto, Houston World Fest, some really big film festivals where it won honors, and I was really excited to be a part of that film. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's on Amazon Prime now. Beautiful Dead Things. It's a short film, but you could definitely go out there and find
things.
it. Yes, Beautiful Dead Things.
Okay. Well, I want to get back to your book,
Yeah.
Let It Out, and talk with you more about that. Accessing your creative voice was something you mentioned in the book, and I want you to tell me what that is. How do you do that?
Yeah, how do you do that? So, to access your creative voice, if you're not sure what I say when I talk about find your jam, right? Whether it's like poetry or songwriting or anything, if you're not sure what your jam is, again, I would invite you to look at the thing you love doing most when you were 7, 8 years old, and find a version of that you can connect with now, and then book some time with yourself to do it. Like actually put it at the top of your to-do list. I like engaging with my creativity first thing in the morning, waking up just a little bit early. And I'd love to encourage people to get to like an hour a day, but some people don't really have time for that in the beginning, and it's really hard for them to feel like they're putting their to-do list on the back burner for their creativity, and they'll feel guilty about it. So I say just book 10 minutes, just 10 minutes. 10 minutes, pens down. And what's beautiful about that is that when the 10 minutes are up, you will probably feel like you were just getting into it, and you'll be eager to get back to it the next day. And we start to almost trick your mind into getting excited to get back to it because you've limited your amount of time for it at first. Once you do that for a little while, you can go to 15 minutes, 20 minutes until you really start to build a habit around it. But finding your creative voice really comes down to being, I guess, just back to that conversation about being vulnerable. Because Carlos Santana once in an interview, I heard him say this really great thing. He says, every time I pick up the guitar, even now, he's been playing for 50 years, 60 years, every time he picks up the guitar and he first starts playing, he kind of just mimics what he's been hearing lately. So he'll play a little riff on the guitar and he'll think, oh, that's kind of reminds me of Miles Davis. And then he'll play another little thing and he'll say, oh, that's kind of Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top. And then he'll kind of just keep playing. And at some point, he just lets himself play and he goes, there I am. He drops into his voice, his signature style. Right. But every time he picks up the guitar, it's not necessarily there immediately. He's got to just go through working out other things he's heard. And so other things he's enjoyed listening to. And so this is what might happen in the very beginning. In the very beginning, like many authors will tell you, many songwriters will tell you, when they first started out, they were simply mimicking their heroes. That was it. They were just trying to write like people who they liked. That's not necessarily going to be your creative voice, is to mimic, but you want to give yourself permission to go ahead and be a mimic right now. Really learn, really see how your knockoff Stephen King measures up to the real Stephen King, how your knockoff Bob Dylan measures up to the real Bob Dylan. See the gap, keep working on it. And at some point, trust that your creative voice and your natural style and your rhythm will begin to emerge over time. And one of the fastest ways to do that is by taking the time to really read your work. Once you've given yourself full permission to do it, then going back and reading your work with a real discerning eye, not a critical eye. It's different. You want to be discerning with it. Which of these lines, if I can only pick one line to share with somebody, which of these sentences is my favorite? What's working about it? What do I love best about this piece? Not what sucks about it. That's the critic. Discernment is different. Discernment looks for, what do I love about this? What am I learning about myself by writing this down? What am I really exploring here? Can I say it? Go a little deeper with it. Can I go even deeper with what I'm trying to say? Now that I've written the surface level around this story, what's even deeper? What's underneath that? And keep going. Work on it the next day, just for 10 minutes or 15, whatever that looks like for you, whatever you have capacity for. But walk away wanting more, and then go back to keep discovering. And I always say, ultimately, until you either ugly cry or let your freak flag fly, you're
Uh-huh.
not there yet. Just
Yeah.
keep going. It's okay to just be in the escapism of it and really just be weird and out there. Keep going with that until you really discover something that feels, this feels like me, the me I don't really ever show people. Or it can also, your creativity can be real catharsis. It can be a really moving experience. And you can get to a place where you can't even read it to another person because you'll burst into tears.
Right.
That's beautiful. That's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Do one or the other. Keep going until you're in that place. If you just read it and it's like, oh, this is pleasant, this is okay, look for where you can go even deeper. That's where your creative voice lives. And it takes courage to do it.
Yeah, you were talking about building up to it. I think so many people sit down and go, "Well, it's four." Excuse me, it's 4:45, so
Yeah.
I'm going to be creative right now,
Yep.
and they try to box it up into that. You need to let it develop, let it flow, right?
Yes, you do. You need to let it flow. You need to give it time. You need to give yourself permission to let it be whatever it is. Some
Mm-hmm.
days in the span of an hour, I'll write 1,500 words, and some days I will write five.
Mm-hmm.
And that's me who's been endeavoring to live creatively for 30 years. You're not always on when you sit down in front of it. And the game is to just grant yourself permission to just acknowledge that you showed up. I
Right.
showed up for myself today, and 5 words is all I had, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it'll be 1,500, but that's okay. And I think that gentleness with yourself, that acceptance of yourself is a big thing with your creativity, and
Mm-hmm.
giving yourself permission to just see what shows up and not to critique it, but to just be aware of it, acknowledge it, accept it. This is where I was at today. This is what I had to give today. It's okay.
Mm-hmm. You were talking about being gentle with yourself. You got to be easy on yourself when you're
Yeah,
being creative. That I agree with that. In the
totally.
book, you also you brought up something that said we are mirrors,
Yeah.
and I want you to talk about that section because that was so stunning. We
Oh,
are
that's really sweet.
mirrors.
Yeah. Well, I think there's so much of what we can learn about ourselves through endeavoring in our creativity, but there's a real power to sharing our creativity, especially when we're scared to do it. But you want to be smart about who you choose to share it with.
Right.
I often say, like, if you're interested in being a professional surfer, don't go to a butcher in the Midwest who's never surfed and ask him whether your style's any good. Um, he won't have any frame of reference for you. And in
Right.
that same way, if you're writing a romance novel, don't give it to someone who's never read a romance novel in their life.
Right.
So be discerning about who you choose to share it with, because it's very easy for people to say, hey, here's what didn't work about it, here's what I didn't like. It's the critic comes up really fast. But give it to a person whose work you either admire or who has at least some capacity or frame of reference for what it is you're trying to do. Those are the people whose feedback I'd be interested in. Anybody else, their feedback actually is completely irrelevant. It
Mm-hmm.
just I can ask a farmer in the Midwest what he thinks of my surfing ability. He's never seen the ocean. So I think it's important that we are discerning with who we choose to share with, and that really, when we share authentically what we're up to,
Right.
it's like that thing I talked about with the woman in Ireland who wrote me, mother of three.
Mm-hmm.
Just who
That was
connected
sweet.
with a song. She saw herself in the work, and I didn't intend it. I didn't even know that's a person that would connect with it, but she did.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really moved by that. And it really was encouraging to me that what we can discover about one another and how much closer the world can feel
Mm-hmm.
when we mirror that experience, when we share ourselves authentically and have more capacity to allow others to share authentically back to us. That exchange is really a really beautiful exchange, because we're exchanging what we're feeling at the soul level, not just, what do you think about your dinner, or what do you think about the
Right.
food I served you? No, it's like it's more. What do you think about this poem? What moved you about it? What were you? And they ask you, what were you thinking about when you wrote that? That's a question I love to ask people when when they share their poetry with me, I ask them, why do you think you wrote this? Of all the poems you could have written, why do you think this is coming up right now? What's happening in your life?
Right.
And you can really get into a really powerful conversation and really be there for someone in a powerful way, and them there for you in their vulnerability of sharing what they're up to and what's going on inside of them.
And you're not necessarily looking for positive feedback or negative feedback. You're looking for the conversation, right?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it, man. It's about whether it sparks a kind of dialogue that we can both, kind of understand, and a kind of dialogue where we can both learn something about ourselves. Where through you sharing your work, I can see something for myself that I may. I always say, don't. My wife is really great with this. She always says, don't get intimidated, get inspired. You're thinking about the wrong eye if you're intimidated by someone's work. Get inspired. That's the I word you want to think about. Be inspired by others and their courage to share their work.
Yeah, exactly. Another part of the book that I found interesting, I'd like for you to talk about this, is how do you find your jam? You mentioned this earlier, your jam. How do you find your jam?
Well, the one thing is, again, like I said, you can think about what you loved to do most when you were 7 or 8. It doesn't matter what that really looks like. Maybe you were just playing with little action figures and just making up stories, but you could get lost in it, and maybe it's just storytelling, and some version of that storytelling is what's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's different. It's different for different people, but you find that thing you love doing most, and then look at what's the creative outlet that connects with that. Some people, this is how they get back to photography. It's like when they were 7 or 8 years old, it was just, they got their own disposable camera or something, or they got their first phone and they took pictures of their family vacation and they got them back and they're like, it's amazing. Look at what the memories they created. And that sparks this idea about photography and the way in which you see the world. There's a little machine and a lens and this camera that does this thing, but so much of how a photo comes out has nothing to do with the camera. It's really the eye of the beholder. Right. And when you honor that, there's something really powerful to it. And so definitely it's knowing finding your jam, but also, it's what did you love doing most when you were younger? There's a version there, or there's just simply, what am I feeling the most curious about right now? Ask, of all the creative endeavors, whether it's poetry or songwriting or a screenplay or a novel or a short story, what do I feel most curious about exploring right now?
Yeah.
Trust your curiosity and always stay curious. If you want to live a creative life, you will find yourself becoming more and more curious about everything in life. It's not necessarily about a calling. It's not about a sense of purpose. It's about, what are you willing to get curious enough about that you're going to be brave enough to explore it. That's it.
Right. And of course, one more thing I wanted to, you've touched on this evening, but how do you find the time to do it? People say, I don't have time. I can't, how do you structure that where you have time to be creative?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing that we tend to do in life. We call it adulting, and we make a to-do list of all the things we need to do, drop the kids off at swim class and because I was school, and then go do my grocery shopping and then get myself to work and get this report turned in. And it's like a long list, the to-do list of the obligations and responsibilities. And we leave the crumbs over there. The crumbs we leave of our energy. We leave for our creativity at the end of the day. They're like, after I get through this to-do list, tonight I'm finally going to sit down and work on that poem, Right. And of course, we don't have the energy for it by the time tonight rolls around. And what I'll say about that is that I think the to-do list is way, 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 way overrated.
Right.
I think why we endeavor to check off a to-do list is because it's the most low-hanging fruit to make us feel like we're being effective at life. But all we're doing it's just task management. This isn't where your soul ever feels lit up. Your soul will never feel lit up working on a to-do list. And so I, at least 2 decades ago, made the conscious decision that I'm going to focus on my creativity first and let the to-do list sort itself out. Right. My responsibilities and obligations I will do last in my day. I will prioritize my creativity first. Wake up 30 minutes earlier instead of falling asleep 30 minutes before I plan. I'll wake up earlier, focus on my creativity. And here's the beautiful thing that emerged from that. Everything I had to do, quote unquote, my responsibilities and obligations, were so much easier to get through.
Hmm.
because I honored myself first. And it built up this vitality in my body because I honored myself and I felt lit up and I felt inspired, that it gave me this amazing energy to just get done the stuff I needed to get done. And I realized that not even putting so much stock in how, these things weren't so important. They'd work themselves out. They really did start to work themselves out. They didn't need quite the amount of attention I was putting on them. And I really saw my addiction to just being able to check something off the list so I could feel effective as a human. When really what's going to make me feel so much more effective as a human is when I was actually connecting with my soul, being creative, and then taking that vitality, that energy, and that inspiration of being creative and giving myself, honoring myself with that time. It made all the stuff I had to do so much easier to do. But it really takes the conscious effort to flip that entire model of how we tend to come at life. We tend to focus on our responsibilities and obligations, feeling like this is my lot in life and what I need to get done. And hopefully I'll have the energy by the end of the day, if I can get it all done in time, to do something creative. And my experience is you'll never experience being creative in that model. Flip it on its head. Start with being creative. The to-do list is going to sort itself out, and you'll have more vitality and energy to do it because you honored yourself and your creativity. That's my experience.
Wow. Wow. Greg, we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about your
Yeah.
book, your career. Is there anything else I haven't asked you that you want to
Yeah.
make sure that you mention?
Oh, this is great. Thanks for that. You know, I think the major thing is just, this book was really kind of it. I wrote it really quickly. And I've never written anything quite so quickly because, again, it's the stuff I've been talking about for 30 years, and the things I've learned about. And I'm so committed that people live a creative life that I just wanted this book to be a real practical guide for them. It's only 100 pages. It's a quick read. You can almost open it up to any page and find some little gem in there, hopefully,
Oh, I
something
did.
that you can take and use and inspire you with. And I wanted to make sure it felt practical and useful. There's a number of books on creativity and some that I mentioned in the book too that I think are profound and amazing. Some of them are more dense and kind of tougher to get into, and it feels almost a little more exclusive. But I wanted to make this a kind of creativity book that anybody, even a person who doesn't necessarily consider themselves creative or talented,
Hmm.
that they could find themselves, locate themselves in it, and see an access point for being more creative and discovering what they might learn about themselves. And so I'm just, it's why I'm doing these podcast interviews. And I appreciate your time for inviting me on to talk about this. I love talking about this stuff. And like I told you, most of my friends can't shut me up about it, which is why I'm sure I was destined to write this book
Yeah.
because it's something I truly love and am truly committed that people live more creative lives because of what's available for their sense of self-worth and acceptance and what they might discover about themselves and truly sharing their world, sharing their unique vantage point on the world.
Yeah.
So thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. Truly, I
Uh,
truly appreciate it.
You're very welcome. James Morrison had mentioned you, and
Yeah,
he's a very creative individual. I love him to
he's
death.
amazing.
He is, and I said immediately, "Oh, definitely, I want to get that guy,
I love it.
on the show." Is there? You're on Instagram. You're on
Yep.
Facebook, I believe.
Yeah.
Your books. We'll put links under the show, but
Yeah.
tell me
Thanks.
about where to find you and your product.
Sure. So the fastest way to find me is you can search. You can find me on Instagram at that Gregg Stewart, and you can find me on the artist formerly known as Twitter, the X at it's Gregg Stewart, but the double G's for Greg, GRE 88. I had two eights, Stewart. It's kind of funny when I have to talk about it. It's easy when you see it, but it's weird to have to try to spell it for people. But maybe we could post that. But yeah, absolutely. If you want to, find me on social media, I'm always up for talking about creativity. And honestly, I put my email address right in the book because I just if someone reads this book and they start making something, I want to know about it. I'm truly excited to hear about what you're making, what you're creating. I'm that committed to people's creativity, and I do. I do coaching consulting sessions. There's some people there's people who hire me, both in corporations and also individuals who are working on something who just need some accountability, almost like, you need to go to the gym, but you need to hire a personal trainer. I can kind of do that around creativity and kind of help you map out a plan and an action plan that'll really work for you in your life. So I'm available for that as well. And yeah, you can. I'm definitely findable. And then the book is available on Amazon, and I have an author page there, and you can contact me through that as well, I believe. So yeah, all fun stuff.
Gregg Stewart, the author of Let It Out. Thank you so much for coming on my show, Gregg, and telling me about
Thank you
it.
so much.
You're
Thank
very
you. Thank you,
welcome.
Jay. Appreciate you. It was a great chat. Thanks for the really thoughtful questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome. And we'll see you next time on the J. Michael Show.
Goodbye.